At her birthday party, she planned to announce her pregnancy. Instead, her billionaire fiancé handed her a gift box. Inside was a note that read, "I'm leaving you. You're useless, and I deserve better." Everyone laughed as he walked away. Their friends stared at her, waiting for a reaction. She just smiled because he didn't know what she could do. Few months later, the billionaire who once humiliated her was drunk in front of her house, screaming her name. "God bless you, my beautiful family." Because of a long introduction, 90% of viewers leave the story early, and YouTube has destroyed my channel. I'm in tears. Now, let us begin the most powerful and heart-touching story written with love. Tisha Watson had rehearsed the words 100 times, but she never imagined she would need to rehearse surviving betrayal. Instead, the crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of Seattle's most exclusive ballroom as 300 guests mingled beneath. Soaring ceilings adorned with fresh white orchids. Tisha Watson smoothed her emerald silk gown, her dark fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the small envelope hidden in her designer purse. Inside that envelope lay the most precious secret she had ever carried, ultrasound photos that would change everything. At 29, turning 30 tonight, Tisha had built a reputation as one of the city's most brilliant marketing strategists. But tonight she stood on the precipice of an entirely different kind of success. After 3 years with Michael Gambon, the tech billionaire whose empire had revolutionized cloud computing, she was ready to share the news that would crown their love story. She was 8 weeks pregnant with their child. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel had been transformed into a palace worthy of royalty for her birthday celebration. Michael had spared no expense, flying in flowers from Ecuador, hiring Seattle's most acclaimed chef, and ensuring that every detail reflected the image of success they had cultivated together. The guest list read like a who's who of the Pacific Northwest's power elite, tech moguls whose companies shaped the digital future, venture capitalists who decided which dreams became reality, politicians whose policies influenced millions of lives. The ballroom buzzed with the energy of Seattle's elite, venture capitalists in tailored suits that cost more than most people's cars, tech moguls with their diamond-draped wives who collected art and charitable causes with equal enthusiasm, politicians who shaped the city's future from mahogany-paneled offices and exclusive club dining rooms. Tisha moved through the crowd like royalty, her natural confidence drawing admiring glances and whispered compliments about her radiant appearance. She had planned every detail of this evening with military precision, the same strategic thinking that had made her campaigns legendary in marketing circles. The announcement would come after dinner, during the traditional birthday toast, when Michael would take the microphone and reveal their beautiful secret to the world. She had even coordinated with the photographer to ensure the perfect shots. Michael's surprise and joy, her radiant smile, the crowd's delighted gasps as they realized they were witnessing the beginning of the next generation of Seattle's most powerful couple. "You look absolutely radiant tonight," they whispered Jennifer Mills, her closest friend and marketing colleague, appearing at Tisha's elbow with champagne flutes. Jennifer's sharp eyes had noticed the subtle changes, the glow that pregnancy brought to Tisha's dark skin, the way she carried herself with new purpose, the secret smile that played at the corners of her mouth. "There's something different about you. You're practically luminous." Tisha accepted the sparkling cider disguised as champagne, her secret smile widening into something that could power the entire ballroom. "Sometimes life gives you gifts you never expected. Blessings you didn't even know you wanted until they choose you." She touched her still flat stomach discreetly, feeling the flutter of excitement that had become her constant companion since discovering the pregnancy 2 weeks ago. "And Michael?" Jennifer probed with the curiosity of someone who had watched their relationship develop from promising beginning to power couple status. "How is he handling your mysterious happiness?" Tisha's gaze found Michael across the room, where he stood surrounded by his usual circle of admirers, fellow billionaires comparing acquisition stories, tech journalists seeking exclusive insights, and startup founders hoping to catch his attention long enough to pitch their revolutionary ideas. At 33, he commanded attention effortlessly, his platinum hair perfectly styled to suggest both authority and approachability, his custom Italian suit emphasizing his tall, lean frame that spoke of personal trainers and carefully managed nutrition. When their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, he raised his champagne glass in her direction with the smile that had first captured her attention 3 years ago. That smile promised everything she had ever wanted: security, status, a family built on success and mutual ambition. Tonight, she would discover which of those promises he intended to keep. "He's going to be thrilled," she said to Jennifer, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never doubted her partner's devotion. "This is what we've been building toward, a real family, a legacy that goes beyond business success." The dinner proceeded flawlessly, each course a masterpiece of culinary artistry that reflected Michael's attention to detail and unlimited resources. Tisha barely tasted the herb-crusted salmon, truffle-infused risotto, and chocolate soufflé that had cost more per plate than many people's weekly groceries. She was too excited about the announcement that would transform their lives, too focused on the future they were about to claim together. Conversations flowed around her like expensive wine, discussions of market trends that would shape the next decade, political alliances that determined Seattle's development, social dynamics that elevated some while diminishing others. This was her world now, or so she believed. These people would become her child's godparents, mentors, the network that would open every door and provide every advantage that wealth and connection could offer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael's voice suddenly boomed through the ballroom as he tapped his champagne flute with a silver spoon engraved with his family crest. The conversations died away like waves receding from a shore as 300 faces turned toward the head table where he stood with the commanding presence that had made him millions. This was it. Tisha's pulse quickened as she prepared for the moment that would define their future, her hand moving instinctively to rest over the secret growing inside her. The ultrasound photos in her purse seemed to pulse with their own energy, waiting to be shared with this glittering assembly of Seattle's most influential people. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate Tisha's birthday," Michael continued, his voice carrying clearly through the ornate space, every word precisely enunciated for maximum impact. "She has been such an important part of my journey for 3 years, and I wanted to mark this milestone in a way that honors our association." Something in his word choice, association, rather than relationship or partnership, sent a chill down Tisha's spine. This wasn't the script they had discussed, wasn't the tone of celebration and joy she had anticipated. But she maintained her composure, trusting that Michael was building dramatic tension before the revelation that would elevate them both. Michael's smile was perfect as he reached into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and theatrical. The ballroom held its collective breath, cameras poised to capture what everyone assumed would be a proposal or some grand romantic gesture. "Tisha, you've been a constant in my life during a crucial period of growth and success. Tonight, I have something very special for you." He produced an elegant gift box, wrapped in silver paper and tied with a white ribbon that caught the chandelier light like captured moonbeams. Tisha's breath caught in her throat as confusion clouded her carefully maintained expression. This wasn't the announcement they had planned, wasn't the script they had rehearsed in her imagination dozens of times. The ultrasound photos remained hidden in her purse as she accepted the box with trembling fingers, her mind racing to understand this deviation from their agreed-upon plan. Perhaps the pregnancy announcement would come after she opened his gift, Perhaps this was his way of creating a perfect romantic moment before sharing their news with the world. "Open it." "Oh, darling," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. 300 pairs of eyes focused on this intimate moment played out on a very public stage. "I think you'll find it very enlightening." With fingers that felt disconnected from her conscious will, Tisha untied the ribbon and lifted the lid of the elegant box. The ballroom held its collective breath as she unfolded what she expected might be a romantic poem, perhaps concert tickets to their favorite symphony, maybe even a key to some surprise he had prepared. Instead, Michael's handwriting stared back at her in bold black ink, each letter formed with the precision of someone who had taken care to ensure maximum impact. "I'm leaving you. You're useless and I deserve better. Find someone on your level." The words hit her like physical blows, each one calculated to destroy not just her happiness, but her dignity, her sense of worth, her understanding of the relationship she thought they had built together. The ballroom seemed to tilt around her as the magnitude of his cruelty sank in. 300 witnesses watching as the man she loved dismantled her life with surgical precision. Time stretched like taffy as she processed the enormity of his betrayal. This wasn't just the end of their relationship. It was the public execution of everything she had believed about love, trust, and the future they had planned together. The baby growing inside her would now face the world without the father she had assumed would be devoted to their child's success and happiness. But Tisha Watson had not survived her childhood in Seattle's toughest neighborhoods, had not built a career in the ruthless world of high-stakes marketing, had not earned her place among the city's elite through weakness or surrender. Something deeper than pride, stronger than embarrassment, more enduring than heartbreak, rose from the core of her being. She folded the note carefully, placed it back in the box, and set it gently on the table with movements that spoke of complete self-control. When she raised her eyes to meet his, her expression was serene, almost peaceful, not the broken smile of a victim, but the dangerous smile of a queen who had just been catastrophically underestimated. "Thank you, Michael," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, with the authority of someone who had found her true power in the moment someone tried to strip it away. "For showing me exactly who you are when I needed to know most. For revealing your character when it matters most. For setting me free to find what I actually deserve." She rose from her chair with fluid grace, her emerald gown flowing around her like liquid courage, every movement deliberate and dignified. The murmurs began then, rippling through the crowd like wildfire as guests processed what they had just witnessed. Not the romantic gesture they had anticipated, but something far more dramatic and infinitely more revealing about the man they had come to celebrate. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Tisha continued, addressing the crowd directly with the poise of someone who had transformed her humiliation into her coronation. "Sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even when it's not what we expected. Tonight, I've been given the gift of clarity, the blessing of truth, and the freedom to build something worthy of who I'm becoming." She picked up her purse where the ultrasound photos remained her secret. A secret Michael would never deserve to know, would never be worthy of sharing. Her child would be born free from his toxicity, raised by a mother who had chosen strength over surrender, dignity over devastation. Michael stood frozen at the head table, his triumph turning to ash as he realized his victim had become his victor. He had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even a public scene that would justify his cruelty in the eyes of their social circle and provide him with the satisfaction of complete domination. Instead, he faced a woman who had transformed his weapon against her into her liberation from him. "Good night, everyone," Tisha said, inclining her head like the queen she had always been, but had forgotten until this moment of ultimate testing. "Thank you for witnessing not my humiliation but my rebirth. Thank you for being here as I discovered what I'm truly capable of becoming." She walked through the ballroom with measured steps, her spine straight and her chin high, the crowd parting before her like courtiers before royalty. Some guests nodded with respect and admiration. Others whispered behind their hands with the fascination of people witnessing history in the making. But no one, absolutely no one, looked at her with pity. The valet brought her car round with unusual speed, perhaps sensing the significance of the moment, perhaps simply responding to the royal bearing that had replaced her earlier nervous excitement. As she slipped into the driver's seat, Tisha placed her hand over her stomach where their child grew, safe and loved despite the chaos surrounding their beginning. "My life will not end here, little one," she whispered to the child Michael would never know, her voice carrying a promise that would reshape both their futures. "This is where our real story begins. This is where we start building our own kingdom." The phoenix was about to rise, and when she spread her wings, the entire world would witness her flight from the ashes of someone else's cruelty to the heights of her own magnificent destiny. Chapter 2. New Kingdom Rising. Thomas Shelby had interviewed hundreds of candidates, but the woman who walked into his office radiated a power that couldn't be taught in business school. 2 months had passed since the ballroom, humiliation that Seattle's social elite were still whispering about in their exclusive clubs and charity galas. The gossip columns had dissected every moment of that evening, turning Tisha Watson into an unexpected symbol of dignity under fire. But while the city speculated about her next move, Tisha was quietly building something far more important than her former social status. She was constructing a foundation for her child's future. The early months of pregnancy brought challenges she hadn't anticipated. Morning sickness arrived like clockwork at 7:30 each day, forcing her to keep crackers and ginger tea within arm's reach. Her body was changing in subtle ways that only she could detect. A slight fullness in her breasts, a new sensitivity to certain smells, an exhaustion that sleep couldn't quite cure. But with each physical reminder of the life growing inside her, her determination solidified into something unbreakable. Her savings account, once padded by Michael's generous gifts and expensive lifestyle, now seemed fragile in the face of single motherhood. The designer wardrobe that had once defined her social status would need to be replaced with practical clothes that could accommodate her changing body. The luxury apartment she had shared with Michael, still technically his property, had become a daily reminder of her former dependence. Independence demanded sacrifice, and Tisha was ready to pay any price necessary. She spent hours each night researching companies, studying their cultures, mapping potential career trajectories that could support both her ambitions and her child's needs. The tech industry that had once embraced her as Michael Gambon's glamorous girlfriend now felt hostile, tainted by association with her very public downfall. But marketing was her weapon of choice, and she wielded it with surgical precision. Shelby Marketing Solutions occupied 3 floors of a restored brick building in Pioneer Square, its industrial aesthetic softened by living walls and natural light streaming through massive windows. The company's reputation preceded them, innovative campaigns that elevated startups into household names, nonprofit work that actually moved social needles, corporate partnerships built on authentic storytelling rather than empty promises. Thomas Shelby had built his firm on the foundation that great marketing began with truth, a philosophy that resonated deeply with Tisha's current worldview. The interview had been scheduled for 10:30 on a Tuesday morning, when her morning sickness typically subsided. Tisha arrived 15 minutes early, her portfolio carefully organized, her 16-week pregnancy invisible beneath a strategically chosen charcoal blazer. She had practiced her responses to anticipated questions, prepared explanations for her sudden career pivot, crafted talking points that showcased her strengths while avoiding any mention of her personal circumstances. Thomas Shelby surprised her from the moment he opened his office door. Where she had expected another polished corporate executive, she found a man whose success hadn't hardened him into untouchable perfection. At 32, he possessed the quiet confidence of someone who had earned respect rather than inherited it. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His office decorated with family photographs and community awards rather than ego trophies. "I've followed your work for years," he said, gesturing for her to sit across from his desk. "The Davidson Hotels campaign you created 3 years ago is still being taught in marketing courses at the University of Washington. Brilliant storytelling married to flawless execution." Tisha felt something she hadn't experienced in months, professional validation that had nothing to do with her romantic associations. "Thank you. That campaign taught me that authenticity always trumps artifice in connecting with audiences." "Speaking of authenticity," Thomas continued, his brown eyes holding hers steadily, "I'm sure you're wondering if I'm hiring you as some kind of charity case after recent events. Let me be clear about something from the start." Tisha braced herself for condescension, disguised as kindness, for the pitying tone that had crept into too many conversations lately. Instead, Thomas leaned forward with the intensity of someone delivering crucial intelligence. "I'm not hiring you because I feel sorry for you," he said firmly. "I'm hiring you because you demonstrated something in that ballroom that money can't buy and business schools don't teach: the ability to transform disaster into dignity. You showed an entire room of Seattle's most powerful people what real class looks like under pressure. That's the kind of character I want representing my company." The words hit her differently than any compliment she had ever received. Here was recognition not of her beauty, her connections, or her romantic associations, but of her strength in her darkest moment. She felt tears threaten and blinked them away quickly, unwilling to appear weak in this crucial moment. "The position we're discussing is Senior Marketing Strategist," Thomas continued, sliding a folder across his desk. "You'd be leading our healthcare and non-profit portfolio, clients who need genuine advocacy, not just clever advertising. The salary is competitive, the benefits are excellent, and the work is meaningful. But I need someone who understands that we're not just selling products here. We're telling stories that can change lives." Tisha opened the folder and scanned the details. The salary wasn't quite what she had earned in her previous role, but it was substantial enough to support her new reality. More importantly, the client list revealed organizations doing work that mattered: children's hospitals, domestic violence shelters, environmental non-profits that actually moved beyond virtue signaling. "Why me?" she asked directly. "You could hire any number of qualified candidates without the baggage that comes with my current reputation." Thomas smiled, and she glimpsed the warmth that had built this company's culture. "Because baggage often becomes wisdom if you're strong enough to carry it properly. You've experienced betrayal, humiliation, and abandonment, all things our non-profit clients' audiences face daily. You can speak to pain with authenticity because you've walked through it yourself." The interview continued for another hour, but Tisha knew within the first 15 minutes that Thomas Shelby understood something about her that Michael Gambon never had. Her value existed independent of anyone else's perception. As they discussed campaign strategies and client relationships, she felt her professional confidence rebuilding itself on more solid ground. "When can you start?" Thomas asked as they shook hands at the conclusion. "Next Monday," Tisha replied without hesitation. "I'm ready to get back to work." As she walked through Pioneer Square back to her car, Tisha felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since discovering her pregnancy. The morning sickness that had plagued her earlier seemed manageable now, overshadowed by the excitement of new purpose. She placed her hand over her stomach, feeling the slight curve that marked her body's accommodation of their growing child. "We did it, little one," she whispered. "We found our new beginning." Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Heard through the grapevine you nailed the Shelby interview. That man builds careers, not just campaigns. You're going to soar there. That evening, Tisha sat in her apartment organizing the client materials Thomas had given her to review before starting. Each nonprofit's mission statement told a story of resilience: cancer survivors rebuilding their lives, immigrants creating new communities, women escaping domestic violence and claiming their power. She saw herself reflected in every story, understanding viscerally what these organizations meant to the people they served. Her laptop pinged with an email from Thomas. "Looking forward to having you join the team. Attached are some background materials on your first project, a fundraising campaign for New Dawn Women's Shelter. I think you'll find their mission particularly inspiring." As she read about the shelter's work, helping women escape abusive relationships and build independent lives, Tisha felt the profound rightness of this new path. She was no longer just seeking employment. She was joining a mission that aligned with her own transformation. She closed her laptop and prepared for bed, her mind already racing with ideas for the shelter campaign. Tomorrow, she would begin building the career that would support her child's future. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about what came next. Success wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving herself right. One campaign at a time. Chapter 3: When Titans Fall. Strength isn't measured by never falling down. It's proven by how gracefully you rise. When your knees hit the ground, 4 weeks into her new role at Shelby Marketing Solutions, Tisha Watson had become the firm's secret weapon. Her non-profit campaigns possessed an emotional resonance that transformed donors from passive contributors into passionate advocates. The New Dawn Women's Shelter campaign had exceeded its fundraising goal by 40%, earning praise from board members who had initially questioned Thomas's decision to hire someone with such public baggage. The morning of September 15th began like every other Tuesday. Tisha arriving at the office by 7:30, armed with herbal tea and the determination that had carried her through 16 weeks of pregnancy. Her body had finally adjusted to its new reality. The morning sickness, retreating enough to allow her to focus entirely on the work that had become her sanctuary. The Children's Medical Foundation campaign consumed her attention that morning. She had spent weeks crafting messaging that honored the family's experiences without exploiting their pain, walking the delicate balance between emotional appeal and respectful advocacy. The presentation to the Foundation's board was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and every detail needed to be perfect. "You've outdone yourself with this one," said Marcus Rivera, her project coordinator. As they reviewed the final materials, the storytelling approach is brilliant, focusing on hope and healing rather than tragedy and trauma. It's going to revolutionize how they connect with donors. Tisha felt the familiar flush of professional satisfaction. These moments, when her work transcended mere advertising to become genuine advocacy, reminded her why she had fallen in love with marketing in the first place. Before Michael, before the social climbing and image crafting, she had believed in the power of authentic storytelling to create meaningful change. The morning progressed smoothly until the team meeting at 11:30. Thomas had called the gathering to review several ongoing campaigns and celebrate recent victories. The conference room buzzed with the energy of a company hitting its stride. Young creatives bouncing ideas off seasoned strategists, account managers sharing client feedback that validated their innovative approaches. Tisha was presenting the Children's Medical Foundation timeline when the room began to tilt around her. The words on her presentation slides blurred as her vision darkened at the edges. She gripped the edge of the conference table, trying to steady herself as her knees buckled beneath her. "Tisha?" Thomas's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay?" She tried to respond, but no words came. The room spun violently as her strength drained away, like water through a broken dam. The last thing she remembered was Thomas's strong hands catching her as she collapsed, his voice urgently calling her name. as darkness claimed her consciousness. When awareness returned, Tisha found herself in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile white walls and antiseptic smells of Seattle General's emergency department. Thomas sat in the chair beside her bed, his usual composed demeanor replaced by genuine concern. Their eyes met as she struggled to orient herself. "Easy," he said softly, reaching for the call button. "Don't try to sit up too quickly. You gave us quite a scare." The memories flooded back, the presentation, the dizziness, the terrifying moment when her body simply stopped obeying her commands. Panic seized her as she remembered the life growing inside her, the precious cargo she had failed to protect. "The baby," she whispered, her hand flying to her stomach. The words escaped before she could stop them, revealing the secret she had guarded so carefully. Thomas's expression shifted from concern to understanding, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "The doctor is coming to talk to you, but from what I understand, everything is fine. You're both going to be okay." Dr. Sarah Chen entered the room, as if summoned by their conversation, her kind face professional but reassuring. "Ms. Watson, you gave your colleague quite a fright. How are you feeling?" "Scared," Tisha admitted, her usual composure abandoned in favor of raw honesty. "I can't lose this baby. I won't survive it." "You're not losing anything," Dr. Chen said firmly, pulling up a chair. "Your baby is perfectly healthy with a strong heartbeat. But we need to talk about what happened today, because your body is sending you a very clear message." She explained what Tisha already suspected, but had been too stubborn to acknowledge. Severe dehydration, exhaustion and stress had combined into a perfect storm of physical breakdown. Her blood pressure was elevated, her iron levels dangerously low, her body crying out for the care she had been denying it in her drive to prove herself professionally. "You're pushing too hard," Dr. Chen continued gently. "I understand the desire to maintain your career, but you're not just responsible for yourself anymore. This baby needs you healthy, which means you need to prioritize rest and proper nutrition alongside your professional ambitions." Thomas listened silently, his presence steady and reassuring, without being intrusive. When Dr. Chen finished her recommendations, modified work schedule, regular meals, prenatal vitamins, stress reduction techniques, he simply nodded, as if these adjustments were already predetermined facts. "I can't afford to be weak," Tisha said quietly after the doctor left them alone. The words carried the weight of everything she had endured, the public humiliation, the financial uncertainty, the pressure to prove she could succeed independently. "If I slow down, if I show any vulnerability, everyone will think Michael was right about me." Thomas leaned forward in his chair, his voice carrying a conviction that demanded attention. "Listen to me very carefully, Tisha. Being human isn't weakness. It's what makes you powerful. The woman who survived that ballroom humiliation with her dignity intact isn't weak. The professional who's revolutionized every campaign she's touched isn't weak. The mother who's building a future for her child while rebuilding her own life isn't weak." His words broke through defenses she hadn't realized she was maintaining. Tears she had held back for months finally escaped, carrying with them the fear and loneliness she had refused to acknowledge. Thomas reached for a box of tissues without judgment, allowing her the space to feel everything she had been suppressing. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said simply. "Whatever you need, adjusted schedules, project support, someone to drive you to doctor's appointments, we'll figure it out. Great companies take care of their people, and great people deserve companies that see their worth." As they waited for her discharge paperwork, Tisha reflected on the profound shift this moment represented. For the first time since learning about her pregnancy, she wasn't facing the challenge entirely alone. Thomas's support wasn't romantic or conditional. It was simply human decency extended to someone who deserved better than she had been receiving. The ride back to her apartment was quiet, both of them processing the day's revelations. When Thomas pulled into her building's parking garage, he turned to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You mentioned you don't have anyone to help you recover," he said carefully. "If you're comfortable with it, I have a guest room and a very flexible work schedule. You could rest properly while staying connected to the projects you care about. No pressure, just an option." The offer hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address directly. Tisha studied his face for any sign of ulterior motive, but found only genuine concern. Her pride warred with her practical needs as she considered the alternatives, recovering alone in her apartment, risking another collapse, potentially endangering the child she was fighting so hard to protect. Sometimes accepting help isn't surrender, it's the smartest strategy for winning the war. Chapter 4. Sanctuary of Souls. In his modest home, she discovered that kindness wasn't a luxury for the privileged. It was the foundation upon which real strength was built. Thomas's house in Capitol Hill defied every expectation Tisha had formed about successful bachelors and their living spaces. Where she had anticipated minimalist furniture and bachelor pad aesthetics, she found warmth that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath hand-woven rugs that told stories of distant travels, while bookshelves lined with well-worn novels and business treatises revealed a mind that sought both entertainment and enlightenment. The guest bedroom, he showed her, possessed the kind of comfort that only came from thoughtful attention to details most people overlooked. The mattress was perfectly firm, the pillows arranged at ideal angles for both sleeping and reading. Fresh flowers, white lilies that wouldn't trigger scent sensitivity, sat on the nightstand beside a pitcher of ice water and a small dish of ginger candies for nausea. "I hope you don't mind," Thomas said, gesturing toward the thoughtful touches. "I called Dr. Chen's office and asked about things that might help during recovery. The nurse was very helpful about pregnancy-related needs for someone at 20 weeks. Tisha stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of someone anticipating her comfort without being asked. In 3 years with Michael, such consideration had been rare and always came with expectations attached. Here was care offered without conditions, support extended without strings. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, settling into the reading chair by the window that overlooked his meticulously maintained garden. "You barely know me, and I've already disrupted your workplace with my personal drama." Thomas perched on the edge of the bed, maintaining respectful distance while ensuring she could see his sincerity. "Because someone should have been doing this for you all along," he replied simply. "And because you matter, not for what you can accomplish or produce, but for who you are as a person." The words settled into spaces in her heart that had been empty for longer than she cared to acknowledge. When had anyone last valued her existence independent of her usefulness? When had someone last offered care without expecting performance in return? That first evening established a rhythm that would carry them through the coming days. Thomas worked from his home office while Tisha rested, emerging periodically to ensure she was comfortable, well-fed, and taking her prescribed medications. He cooked simple, nutritious meals that satisfied her pregnancy cravings, without overwhelming her sensitive stomach. Grilled chicken with herbs from his garden, fresh fruit smoothies packed with vitamins, homemade soups that warmed her from within. "You don't have to hover," she told him on the second morning as he delivered breakfast to her room. "I'm not going to disappear if you stop watching me for 5 minutes. I'm not hovering," he replied, with a smile that reached his eyes. "I'm ensuring our star strategist recovers properly so she can get back to changing the world." Purely selfish motivations. But Tisha saw through his casual deflection to the genuine concern beneath. She watched him work through the open door of his office, taking client calls while monitoring her needs, rearranging meetings to accommodate her recovery schedule, turning down evening events that would take him away from home. His dedication wasn't performative or designed to impress. It was simply who he was when someone needed him. On the second afternoon, she felt strong enough to join him in the living room, curling up on his comfortable sofa with her laptop to review campaign materials. The Children's Medical Foundation presentation had been postponed, but she could still contribute to the strategy refinement. Thomas worked at the dining table, his papers spread across its surface as he balanced multiple client needs. "Tell me about the shelter campaign," he said during a break, settling into the armchair across from her. "What made you approach it so differently than traditional non-profit messaging?" Tisha looked up from her screen, considering how to articulate the insight that had driven her strategy. Most domestic violence campaigns focus on the trauma, the black eyes, the fear, the statistics about women who don't survive. They're designed to shock people into caring, but shock has diminishing returns. People build immunity to emotional manipulation, so you focused on strength instead of victimization, Thomas observed, following her logic. Exactly. I focused on the moment these women decide they deserve better, the courage it takes to walk away from everything familiar, the incredible strength required to rebuild from nothing. I wanted donors to see themselves in these women's determination, not their suffering. Thomas nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. You wrote from personal experience. It wasn't a question, and Tisha didn't treat it as one. Leaving takes different kinds of courage, depending on your circumstances. But the emotional core is the same, realizing you deserve better than what you're accepting. They worked in comfortable silence after that. The only sounds, the gentle clicking of keyboards and the occasional rustle of papers. Tisha found herself stealing glances at Thomas as he concentrated on his work, the way he chewed his pen when considering difficult decisions, the unconscious smile that appeared when reading positive client feedback, the careful attention he gave to every detail of every project. This was masculinity she hadn't encountered before, strength that protected rather than dominated, confidence that built others up rather than tearing them down. Thomas wielded his success like a tool for creating positive change, rather than a weapon for asserting superiority. Watching him work, she began to understand why his company culture felt so different from every other agency she had experienced. That evening, as Thomas prepared dinner, Tisha's phone rang with a call from Jennifer Mills. She answered reluctantly, knowing her friend would want details about her mysterious absence from the social circuit. "Where have you been hiding?" Jennifer demanded without preamble. "The rumor mill has you everything from entering rehab to fleeing the country." "I need facts, Watson. I've been recovering from a health scare," Tisha replied carefully, unwilling to share her pregnancy news before she was ready. "Nothing dramatic, just needed to rest. And you're doing this recovery where exactly?" "Because I drove by your apartment yesterday and your car wasn't there." Tisha glanced toward the kitchen where Thomas was chopping vegetables, his movements efficient and practiced. "I'm staying with a friend who's helping me get back on my feet." "A friend?" Jennifer's voice sharpened with curiosity. "What kind of friend? Male or female? Professional or personal? Give me something to work with here." Before Tisha could respond, Thomas appeared with a steaming mug of chamomile tea, setting it beside her with the same gentle consideration he had shown all week. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw understanding in his expression. No pressure to explain, no judgment about her privacy needs. "The kind of friend who brings you tea without being asked," Tisha said into the phone, her gaze still locked with Thomas's. "I'll call you back later. Jen, I need to rest." After hanging up, she sat with the warm mug between her hands, inhaling the soothing steam. Thomas had returned to the kitchen, giving her space to process the call without hovering or asking questions. Such restraint was foreign to her experience with men. Most demanded explanations, insisted on knowing every detail of her conversations and connections. "Thank you," she said, when he brought her a plate of perfectly seasoned salmon and roasted vegetables. "For cooking? It's nothing special, just—" "Not for the food," she interrupted softly. For all of it. For not asking questions I'm not ready to answer. For taking care of me without making it feel like I owe you something. For showing me what kindness looks like when it's not attached to expectations. Thomas settled into the chair across from her, his own plate balanced on his knees. Everyone deserves that kind of care. Tisha, the fact that you're surprised by basic human decency says more about how you've been treated than it does about what you deserve. As they ate in comfortable silence, Tisha felt something shifting inside her chest. Not romantic attraction, though she couldn't deny Thomas's appeal, but something deeper and more foundational. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely safe, not just physically protected, but emotionally secure in a way that allowed her to truly relax. True power, she was learning, wasn't the ability to destroy those who hurt you. It was the courage to accept love from those who saw your worth. Chapter 5. The Chrysalis Stage. She had built walls so high that even she had forgotten there were doors hidden in their foundation, waiting for someone worthy to find the keys. By the third day of recovery in Thomas's home, Tisha felt her physical strength returning alongside something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace. The combination of proper nutrition, adequate rest, and complete freedom from judgment had worked better than any medicine Dr. Chen could have prescribed. Her body was healing, but more importantly, her spirit was remembering what safety felt like. The morning of her fourth day arrived with September sunshine streaming through the guest room windows, painting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor. Tisha woke naturally for the first time since her pregnancy began. Her internal clock finally synchronized with her body's needs rather than the relentless demands of proving herself professionally. From the kitchen came the gentle sounds of Thomas preparing breakfast, the quiet sizzle of eggs in a pan, the soft whistle of a tea kettle, the measured rhythm of someone who found meditation in simple domestic tasks. These sounds had become the soundtrack of her healing, evidence that someone was taking care of the details of daily life while she focused on recovery. When she emerged from the guest room, Tisha found Thomas at the stove, wearing faded jeans and a grey sweater that emphasized the broad strength of his shoulders. His dark hair was slightly mussed from sleep, and he moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely comfortable in his own space. The sight of him, masculine and capable yet utterly unthreatening, stirred something in her chest that she immediately pushed away. "Good morning," he said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence in the doorway. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted, accepting the mug of herbal tea he offered. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without anxiety as my alarm clock. Thomas plated scrambled eggs beside perfectly toasted bread and fresh fruit, creating a meal that satisfied both nutritional needs and aesthetic appreciation. They had fallen into this routine over the past few days: breakfast together before he started his workday, lunch shared between client calls, dinner conversations that ranged from business strategy to personal philosophy. "I've been thinking about your situation," Thomas said carefully as they settled at his small dining table. "Not to pressure you or overstep boundaries, but I wanted you to know what I'm observing from my perspective." Tisha tensed slightly, her defenses automatically rising despite the safe environment Thomas had created. "What kind of observations?" "You apologize for taking up space," he said gently, his brown eyes holding hers steadily. "You thank me for basic human decency, as if kindness is some extraordinary gift you don't deserve. You eat like you're afraid someone might take your food away if you seem too hungry." The accuracy of his observations hit like physical blows, each one exposing vulnerabilities she thought she had hidden behind professional competence and carefully maintained composure. She set down her fork, her appetite suddenly vanishing. "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," Thomas continued quickly, recognizing her withdrawal. "But I see a woman who's been conditioned to expect cruelty instead of care, abandonment instead of support. Whatever happened to you before that night in the ballroom? It was bigger than just one public humiliation. Tisha stared at her plate, fighting the urge to flee back to the guest room where she could hide behind closed doors and emotional distance. Thomas was seeing too much, understanding too clearly, approaching truths she wasn't ready to examine, let alone discuss. "He never hit me," she said quietly, the words emerging without her permission. "Michael never raised his hand to me, never left visible bruises, but emotional abuse doesn't leave marks people can photograph." The admission hung between them like a bridge she couldn't uncross. Thomas remained perfectly still, not moving closer or offering empty reassurances, simply creating space for whatever she needed to say next. "He made me doubt everything about myself," she continued, her voice gaining strength as the words found their freedom. "My intelligence, my worth, my right to have opinions that differed from his. He isolated me from friends who asked too many questions, convinced me that my career success only mattered if it reflected well on him." Thomas's expression darkened with understanding and carefully controlled anger. "That's why the pregnancy news felt so dangerous. He'd already established that your value was conditional on his approval." "I was going to tell him that night," Tisha whispered, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach, where their child continued growing despite everything. "I thought a baby would finally prove I was worthy of his love. I was so naive." "You weren't naive," Thomas said firmly. "You were hopeful. There's a difference between stupidity and believing that someone you loved was capable of growth." They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of what had been shared. Tisha felt simultaneously exposed and relieved, terrified that she had revealed so much, yet grateful to finally speak truths she had buried beneath layers of professional ambition and social performance. "What changed?" Thomas asked eventually. "What made you strong enough to walk away that night instead of accepting his cruelty?" Tisha considered the question, tracing her finger around the rim of her tea mug as she searched for the answer. "The baby changed everything. I realized I couldn't raise a child in a relationship built on conditional love and emotional manipulation. I couldn't teach them that their worth depended on someone else's approval." "So you chose your child over your comfort zone." I chose my child over my fear," she corrected. "Comfort was never really an option with Michael. I was just too afraid of being alone to admit how miserable I was." Thomas nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And now, how do you feel about being alone?" The question caught her off guard, forcing her to examine emotions she had been avoiding since that night in the ballroom. "Terrified," she admitted honestly, "but also relieved. For the first time in years, I can make decisions based on what's actually best for me, rather than what might earn someone else's approval." "That's growth," Thomas observed. "Real strength isn't never being afraid, it's acting with integrity despite the fear." As the morning progressed, they returned to the comfortable rhythm that had characterized her recovery period. Thomas worked from his home office while she rested, but the conversation from breakfast had shifted something fundamental between them. The walls she had built around her emotional vulnerability remained intact, but small windows had opened, spaces where genuine connection could take root if she ever found the courage to let it. That afternoon, as Thomas took a client call in his office, Tisha found herself studying the photographs that lined his living room walls. Unlike Michael's carefully curated collection of professional achievements and social status symbols, Thomas's images told stories of authentic relationships and meaningful experiences. Family gatherings where genuine laughter lit up faces, travel, adventures that emphasized cultural connection over luxury consumption, community service events where he was clearly more interested in the work than the recognition. One photograph particularly caught her attention. Thomas, with his arm around an elderly woman whose smile radiated warmth and wisdom. They stood in front of what appeared to be a small restaurant, both wearing aprons and holding cooking utensils like proud warriors displaying their weapons. "That's my grandmother," Thomas said from the doorway, having finished his call. "She taught me that feeding people is one of the purest forms of love." That picture was taken at her restaurant the day she officially retired and handed the business over to my cousin. "She raised you?" Tisha asked, noting the obvious affection in his voice. "After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Grandma Elena saved my life in every way that mattered, gave me roots, taught me values, showed me what unconditional love looked like." The story explained so much about Thomas's character, his instinctive nurturing, his ability to provide care without expecting gratitude, his understanding that strength and gentleness weren't mutually exclusive. He had been raised by a woman who understood that real power came from building others up rather than tearing them down. "She would have liked you," Thomas added quietly. "She always said the strongest people were those who had survived their own breaking and chosen to become healers instead of destroyers." As evening approached, Tisha felt the familiar tug of her old life trying to reclaim her. Her apartment waited with its responsibilities and reminders of everything she was trying to rebuild. The real world existed beyond Thomas's sanctuary, and eventually she would need to return to it. But not yet, not while she was still learning what it felt like to be cared for without conditions, to be valued for her humanity rather than her productivity. In Thomas's home, she was discovering that her walls had doors after all. She just needed to find the courage to open them when the right person proved worthy of the keys. Chapter 6. Miracle arrives. Maya Watson entered the world like her mother, small but mighty, with a voice that demanded to be heard and a spirit that refused to be overlooked. 5 months had passed since Thomas first offered Tisha sanctuary in his home. 5 months during which their professional partnership had evolved into something far more complex and meaningful. She had eventually returned to her own apartment, but the invisible thread connecting them had only strengthened with time and shared experience. Thomas had become her closest confidant, her most trusted advisor, and the man who never failed to answer when her world felt unstable. The final weeks of pregnancy had been both magical and exhausting. Tisha's body had transformed into something she barely recognized. Her movements had become deliberate and careful, her sleep interrupted by tiny limbs exploring their cramped quarters. Her emotions heightened to levels that made every commercial about families bring tears to her eyes. Thomas had adapted his schedule to accommodate her increasing needs, driving her to weekly appointments, assembling baby furniture with the methodical precision he brought to major campaigns, and somehow managing to remain enthusiastic about every mundane detail of pregnancy preparation. The January morning that would change everything began with the kind of snow that transformed Seattle into a winter wonderland. Large, soft flakes that fell steadily outside Tisha's apartment windows, muffling the usual city sounds and creating a hushed expectancy in the air. She woke at 5:30, not to her alarm, but to the unmistakable sensation that her body had decided the waiting was over. The contractions started gently, like waves lapping at a distant shore, easily dismissed as the Braxton Hicks episodes that had been teasing her for weeks. But these felt different, deeper, more purposeful, carrying an urgency that made her sit up in bed and pay attention. As she moved through her morning routine, shower, breakfast, final preparations that suddenly felt crucial, the sensations intensified with mathematical precision, building toward something undeniable. By 8 o'clock, there was no question about what was happening. Her water had broken during breakfast, soaking through her favorite maternity dress and confirming what her body had been trying to tell her for hours. Tisha called Thomas first, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment approaching. "It's time," she said simply when he answered on the second ring. "Time for what?" Thomas asked, though she could hear in his voice that he already knew had been expecting this call for weeks. "Time to meet your honorary godchild," Tisha replied, gripping the kitchen counter as another contraction peaked with intensity that stole her breath. "My water broke 20 minutes ago and these contractions are getting serious fast. I think she's decided that today is her birthday." The line went quiet for a moment, and she could practically hear his mental gears shifting from business executive to devoted partner in this journey. "I'm leaving the office now," his voice returned with the calm competence that had carried them through every crisis of the past months. "Don't drive yourself anywhere. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Do you have your hospital bag?" "Packed and ready by the door since Christmas," she confirmed, breathing through another wave of intensity that seemed to originate in her very core and radiate outward. "Thomas, I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this?" "You can do anything," he said with absolute conviction. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, and you're not doing this alone. I'll be right there." True to his word, Thomas arrived at her apartment in 14 minutes, taking the stairs 2 at a time to reach her third-floor unit. He found her in the living room, timing contractions with the focused concentration she brought to every important project. Her overnight bag and car seat waiting by the door, like soldiers prepared for deployment. But he also noticed the fear in her eyes, the way her usual confidence had been replaced by the vulnerability that came with approaching the unknown. "How are we doing?" he asked, immediately taking charge of logistics while offering her his steady presence as an anchor. "Contractions every 4 minutes, lasting about a minute each," she reported with the precision of someone who had researched every aspect of labor extensively. "They're getting stronger. I think this baby is more eager to make her entrance than we anticipated." Thomas helped her into her coat, grabbed her bag and the car seat, and guided her toward the door with movements that were efficient but never hurried. Every gesture communicated the same message. They had prepared for this moment. Everything would be fine. She could trust him to handle whatever needed handling while she focused on the incredible work her body was doing. The drive to Seattle General Hospital required all of Thomas's considerable skill at remaining calm under pressure. Seattle traffic, never cooperative under the best circumstances, seemed particularly determined to delay their progress through snow-slicked streets. But he navigated the challenging conditions with patient determination, while Tisha breathed through increasingly intense contractions in the passenger seat. "Remember what we learned in the birthing class," he said during a red light that felt eternal, his voice steady and encouraging. "Slow, deep breaths. Focus on meeting your daughter, not on the discomfort. Think about holding her, seeing her face for the first time. Tisha managed between contractions, despite everything finding humor in his choice of words. "I don't remember you officially signing up for labor coaching duties when you hired me." "I signed up for whatever you need," Thomas replied simply, reaching over to squeeze her hand as the contraction peaked. "That's what family does for each other." The word family hung between them as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. Heavy with implications neither was prepared to examine in the midst of labor's urgency. But Tisha felt its truth settling into her heart, whatever the technical definitions of their relationship. Thomas had become the person she turned to in crisis, the one she trusted with her most vulnerable moments. Labor progressed with the swift intensity of a woman whose body knew exactly what it was doing. The medical team at Seattle General moved with practiced efficiency, but it was Thomas's unwavering presence that kept Tisha grounded throughout the process. He held her hand during contractions, reminded her to breathe when pain threatened to overwhelm her focus, and provided the steady stream of encouragement that helped her channel her strength most effectively. "You're incredible," he told her during the hardest moments, his voice cutting through the medical chaos to reach her directly. "Look what you're doing, bringing life into the world through sheer force of will and determination. Maya is so lucky to have you as her mother." The hours blended together in a haze of intense focus, medical monitoring, and Thomas's constant presence. He never left her side, even when the nurses suggested he might want to take breaks. He learned to interpret the monitors, to anticipate her needs, to provide exactly the right words of encouragement when her strength flagged. "I can't do this," she gasped during transition, the most intense phase of labor. "It's too much. I'm not strong enough." "Yes, you are," Thomas said firmly, his face close to hers, his eyes holding hers with absolute faith. "You survived Michael's betrayal and built a career from nothing. You've carried this baby through months of uncertainty and created a safe space for her to grow. This is just the final step in the most amazing thing you've ever done." At 3:47 in the afternoon, after 8 hours of labor that felt both eternal and impossibly brief, Maya Watson made her dramatic entrance into the world. She emerged with lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward, her tiny fists waving indignantly at the sudden brightness and noise surrounding her new environment, her dark hair already showing the stubborn cowlicks that would define her personality. "She's perfect," Dr. Martinez announced, placing the squirming, protesting bundle on Tisha's chest. Healthy lungs, all 10 fingers and toes, and clearly ready to take on the world. 6 pounds, 4 ounces of pure determination, but it was Thomas's expression that captured the moment's true magic. As he looked at Maya for the first time, this child who carried no genetic connection to him, but had already claimed a permanent place in his heart, tears flowed freely down his face. His hands shook as he gently touched her tiny fingers, his voice thick with emotion when he spoke. "Hello, beautiful girl," he whispered. His words meant for Maya, but his eyes meeting Tisha's with an intensity that made her breath catch, despite her exhaustion. "Welcome to your kingdom. You're going to be so incredibly loved." Maya seemed to recognize his voice, her crying subsiding as she turned toward the sound with the focused attention that would characterize her approach to everything. When Thomas gently stroked her cheek, she grasped his finger with surprising strength, holding on as if she already understood that this man was someone important in her world. "She knows you," Tisha whispered, watching the interaction with wonder. "Look how she responds to your voice, how she holds your finger. She's been listening to you talk to her for months." The next hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, paperwork, and the overwhelming rush of hormones and emotions that accompanied new motherhood. But through it all, Thomas remained her anchor, handling phone calls to notify friends and family, ensuring she had everything she needed for comfort, learning the intricate details of newborn care with the dedication he brought to mastering any new skill. When the nurses finally settled them into a private recovery room, Tisha found herself watching Thomas hold Maya with an expertise that seemed impossible for someone who had never been a parent. He changed her first diaper without hesitation, warmed her bottle to the perfect temperature, and somehow intuited exactly how to position her for optimal comfort during feeding. "You're a natural," she observed, her voice soft with exhaustion and wonder as she watched him rock Maya to sleep. "She's completely relaxed in your arms. It's like she's been waiting her whole life to meet you." "She makes it easy," Thomas replied, his attention focused entirely on the tiny face peeking out from her pink blanket. "Look at her. She already knows exactly what she wants and isn't afraid to ask for it. She definitely gets that determination from her mother." As visiting hours ended and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, Thomas made no move to leave. The nurses had provided him with a reclining chair that converted into a makeshift bed, and he had clearly planned to spend the night ensuring both mother and daughter had everything they needed. "You don't have to stay," Tisha said, though she hoped desperately that he would. "I know you have work tomorrow, responsibilities that can't wait." Nothing is more important than this, Thomas interrupted gently, settling into the chair with Maya still sleeping peacefully in his arms. You two are my priority now, tonight and always. Work can definitely wait. In the dim light of the hospital room, with Maya breathing softly between them and the snow continuing to fall outside their window, Tisha felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of family. Blood didn't determine love, choice did. And Thomas had chosen them, completely and without reservation, in a way that Maya's biological father never could or would. Love. She realized watching Thomas cradle her daughter wasn't about biology, it was about showing up, staying present, and choosing someone's happiness over your own convenience. Chapter 7. The Village It Takes. He changed. Diapers like a man who understood that real strength shows up in the 3 a.m. moments when no one's watching and no one's keeping score. The first weeks of Maya's life established rhythms that would have been impossible to imagine before her arrival. Thomas had somehow reorganized his entire world around the needs of a 7-pound person who communicated exclusively through crying, sleeping, and the occasional perfect smile that made every sleepless night worthwhile. His penthouse apartment, once the pristine domain of a successful bachelor, had transformed into Maya Central Command. The guest room now housed a crib that Thomas had assembled with the same methodical attention he brought to major marketing campaigns. The living room featured a bouncy seat strategically positioned to provide optimal views of both the television and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Every surface held supplies, burp cloths, bottles, diapers, the endless accessories required to support someone who weighed less than most cats, but needed more equipment than a small army. Tisha had returned to work part-time 6 weeks after Maya's birth, a transition made possible only by Thomas's willingness to restructure not just his schedule, but his entire approach to professional responsibility. He had installed a nursery area in his office, complete with a crib for Maya's naps and a comfortable chair where Tisha could pump breast milk between client meetings. Their colleagues had adjusted to the sound of occasional baby babbles during conference calls, and several major clients had specifically requested to meet Maya during presentations. She's going to grow up thinking boardrooms are playgrounds, Tisha observed one Thursday afternoon as Maya gurgled happily from her bouncy seat while they reviewed campaign materials for Pacific Northwest Medical Center. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Thomas replied, pausing in his review of budget projections to make exaggerated facial expressions that sent Maya into delighted giggles. She'll understand from day one that work should be meaningful and that the best teams feel like family. Watching him with Maya never failed to stir something complex in Tisha's chest, gratitude mixed with longing, appreciation tangled with emotions she wasn't ready to name. Thomas had embraced fatherhood with a naturalness that suggested he had been waiting his entire life for this role. He knew Maya's feeding schedule better than some biological fathers knew their own children's names. He could identify the subtle differences between her hungry cry, her tired cry, and her pay attention to me immediately cry from 3 rooms away. The evening routine had become sacred territory for all 3 of them. Thomas would arrive at Tisha's apartment by 6 o'clock, bearing takeout from whatever restaurant had earned Maya's approval through the mysterious alchemy of infant preference. They would eat while Maya entertained them from her high chair, babbling commentary on their conversations and occasionally throwing food with the concentrated focus of a scientist conducting experiments. Bath time belonged to Thomas. He had mastered the delicate art of supporting Maya's tiny body while ensuring her safety, talking to her in a steady stream of encouragement and nonsense that made her smile and splash with delight. Tisha would watch from the doorway, her heart clenching with emotions too complex to untangle, as this man who owed them nothing gave them everything. "Uncle Thomas is going to spoil you rotten," she would tell Maya during these moments. using the title they had agreed upon to define his role in their unconventional family structure. But lately, Maya had begun showing preferences that complicated their careful boundaries. She would calm faster in Thomas's arms when she was fussy, her tiny face lighting up with recognition when he entered a room, her sleep more peaceful when he was the one reading her bedtime stories in his deep, gentle voice that seemed to carry magical properties for soothing fractious infants. "She thinks you're her father," Tisha said one evening in late February as they watched Maya drift off to sleep in Thomas's arms. The observation carried weight beyond its simple statement of fact. "Is that a problem?" Thomas asked carefully, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid disturbing Maya's transition into sleep. Tisha considered the question, studying the scene before her. This man who had claimed no biological connection to her daughter, but loved her as completely as any parent ever could. "It should be," she said honestly. "It should terrify me that she's getting so attached to someone who could walk away at any time. But I watch you with her, and I see something I never thought existed. Unconditional love without ownership, devotion without control. You love Maya for who she is, not for what she represents to you." Thomas shifted carefully in the rocking chair they had placed by Maya's crib, his movements practiced and gentle. "She represents everything good in the world to me," he said quietly. "Hope and possibility, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. How could I not be devoted to that?" The conversation hung between them as they moved through Maya's bedtime routine, transferring her sleeping form to her crib, adjusting her blankets, checking that the baby monitor was functioning properly. These domestic rituals had become as natural as breathing, creating intimacy through shared purpose rather than romantic gestures. As spring arrived in Seattle, Maya's personality began asserting itself with increasing clarity. She was curious about everything, her dark eyes tracking movement and color with the focused intensity of someone determined to understand her environment completely. She had developed distinct preferences for music. Classical pieces sent her into peaceful trances, while upbeat pop songs inspired enthusiastic dancing that consisted mainly of arm-waving and delighted squealing. "She has your determination," Thomas observed one Saturday morning as they watched Maya systematically destroy her toys in what appeared to be a scientific study of cause and effect. "Look at that concentration. She's not just playing, she's conducting research." "And your stubbornness," Tisha replied, noting the way Maya continued trying to fit a square block into a round hole despite repeated failures. "She gets that refusal to accept defeat from spending so much time with you." Their easy banter masked the growing complexity of emotions neither was prepared to address directly. Somewhere between midnight feedings and shared exhaustion, between inside jokes about Maya's expressions and the comfortable silence of two people raising a child together, friendship had evolved into something deeper and more dangerous. The shift became impossible to ignore during Maya's 4-month checkup in May. Dr. Chen had praised Maya's development, noting her advanced social skills and secure attachment patterns. As they left the pediatrician's office, Maya babbling happily from her car seat, Thomas made an observation that stopped Tisha in her tracks. "She's never going to remember a time when I wasn't here," he said, his voice carrying wonder and something that might have been fear. "For her, this is normal, having both of us here, being loved by both of us. She won't know that families don't always look like this." Tisha felt her throat tighten with emotions she couldn't afford to examine too closely. "Is that what we are?" she asked carefully. "A family?" Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her in the hospital parking garage with an expression that made her breath catch. "What would you call it?" he asked gently. "We share responsibility for raising Maya. We make decisions together about her welfare. We've reorganized our entire lives around her needs and couldn't imagine it any other way." "That sounds like partnership," Tisha said, her voice barely steady. "It sounds like love," Thomas replied simply. "Family, She was learning wasn't always born. Sometimes it was built, one shared moment of devotion at a time. Chapter 8. Hearts Under Construction. Love had knocked on her door before and burned the house down, but this time it came with blueprints for something beautiful and foundations strong enough to last forever. By Maya's 6-month birthday in July, the delicate balance they had maintained began shifting towards something neither could ignore. The summer heat had settled over Seattle like a warm blanket, and Thomas had taken to bringing Maya to his apartment's rooftop garden, where she could experience sunshine and fresh air while remaining safely contained in her portable playpen. Watching him point out different flowers and explain their growing patterns to a baby who responded with enthusiastic babbling made Tisha's heart perform gymnastics she couldn't control. The rooftop had become their evening sanctuary, a place where the three of them could exist as a family unit without the professional boundaries that defined their daytime interactions. Thomas had installed shade structures and safety barriers, transforming the space into Maya's personal outdoor paradise. Baby toys were scattered between herb planters and flowering bushes, creating a landscape that perfectly captured their life. Beautiful, unconventional, and somehow completely right. The partnership at Shelby Marketing Solutions had flourished beyond all expectations. Tisha's campaigns consistently exceeded client objectives, her instinctive understanding of human resilience translating into messaging that moved audiences from passive awareness to active engagement. Thomas had officially promoted her to senior partner, a title that came with equity stakes and decision-making authority that would have seemed impossible just over a year ago when she was starting over from devastation. Their professional success provided the foundation for personal conversations that ventured into increasingly intimate territory. Late evenings found them on Thomas's apartment balcony after Maya had fallen asleep, sharing wine and perspectives on everything from childhood experiences to future dreams, building the kind of emotional intimacy that made physical attraction inevitable. The domestic rhythms they had established felt increasingly like marriage without the official recognition. Thomas kept Maya's favorite foods in his refrigerator, had memorized her feeding schedule down to the minute, and could identify her different cries from 3 rooms away. His apartment had been transformed to accommodate a baby who spent more time there than in her own nursery, complete with safety gates, outlet covers, and an impressive collection of age-appropriate toys. "Tell me about the woman you thought you'd marry before Maya came along," Tisha said one particularly warm evening as they watched the sunset paint Elliott Bay in shades of gold and rose. Maya slept peacefully in her travel crib inside, giving them rare moments of adult conversation that didn't involve discussing diaper contents or sleep schedules. Thomas considered the question while swirling his wine, his expression thoughtful rather than evasive. The golden light caught the planes of his face, emphasizing the quiet strength that had attracted her from their very first interview. "I always imagined someone who shared my values about family and community, someone who understood that success meant building something meaningful rather than just accumulating wealth. But I never imagined someone who had already proven her strength through surviving betrayal and rebuilding from nothing." "That's not really an answer to my question," Tisha pressed gently, tucking her legs under her in the comfortable chair that had become her designated spot on his balcony. "I'm asking about your actual plans, not your theoretical ideals. Surely there was someone specific, some relationship that seemed headed toward permanence." Thomas set down his wine glass and turned to face her more fully, his brown eyes holding hers with the kind of honesty that made her pulse quicken. "I dated, of course. There were women who checked all the boxes on paper: successful careers, shared interests, social compatibility. But none of them ever made me want to reorganize my entire life around their happiness." The confession hung between them, weighted with implications that neither was quite ready to address directly. Tisha felt her carefully constructed boundaries beginning to shift under the pressure of emotions she had been suppressing for months. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas rose from his chair and moved to lean against the balcony railing, his silhouette framed against the Seattle skyline. "Now, I can't imagine my life without Maya's laughter filling my apartment every morning, without our conversations over coffee while she entertains us with her latest achievements, without being the person you call when you need someone to depend on. Everything changed the moment you two became my family." The word family hung between them again, but this time it carried different weight, not the practical acknowledgement of shared responsibility, but something deeper and more intentional. Tisha felt her heart racing as she recognized the moment she had been both hoping for and dreading. "Thomas," she began carefully, rising to join him at the railing where the evening breeze carried the scent of his rooftop herbs, "what we have is good. It works for Maya, it works for our careers, it gives us both stability and emotional support. But if we cross certain lines, if we make this complicated with romantic expectations—" "Who says romance has to be complicated?" Thomas interrupted gently, turning to face her fully. The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity as he stepped closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he used when Maya was sleeping nearby. "What if it could be as natural as everything else we've built together? What if it could make us stronger instead of threatening what we already have?" Before she could formulate a response, Maya's voice drifted from inside the apartment, not crying, but the musical babbling that indicated she was awake and entertaining herself with whatever mobile or toy was within reach. Thomas moved immediately to check on her, his parental instincts as finely tuned as any biological father's. He returned carrying Maya, who had clearly decided that sunset viewing required her immediate participation. She had grown so much in 6 months, her dark hair now long enough to curl at the ends, her chubby legs strong enough to support bouncing, her personality assertive enough to make her preferences known through a sophisticated system of sounds and gestures. "Someone wanted to join the party," Thomas announced, settling back into his chair with Maya positioned to see the sunset view. "She apparently has opinions about being left out of important conversations." Maya chose that moment to perform one of her newest tricks, clapping her hands while making delighted squealing sounds, a behavior that never failed to make both adults laugh despite seeing it dozens of times daily. But tonight, as Tisha watched Thomas encourage Maya's performance with exaggerated applause and proud commentary, something shifted irrevocably in her emotional landscape. This was what love looked like, not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but a man who genuinely delighted in a 6-month-old's clapping skills. Not promises of devotion, but daily proof of commitment through actions that put Maya's joy before his own convenience. Not the passionate instability she had mistaken for romance with Michael, but the steady warmth that created security for everyone it touched. "I'm scared," she said suddenly, the words emerging without conscious decision. Thomas looked up from making silly faces that were sending Maya into giggling fits. "Of what specifically?" "Of wanting this too much," Tisha admitted, her voice carrying years of disappointment and hard-learned caution. "Of believing it could actually work and then losing everything when it falls apart. Maya needs stability, consistency. She needs adults who put her welfare ahead of their romantic drama." Thomas handed Maya her favorite teething ring and gave his full attention to Tisha, his expression serious but gentle. "What makes you think it would fall apart?" "Because that's what happens," she said, years of disappointment and betrayal coloring her voice. "People make promises they don't keep. They say they love you, and then use that love as a weapon when you disappoint them. They walk away when things get difficult or boring or inconvenient. That's what Michael did," Thomas corrected quietly. "That's what people who don't understand real love do. But Maya and I aren't going anywhere, romance or no romance. You could reject every feeling I have for you, and I would still show up for her bedtime story tomorrow night. You could marry someone else entirely, and I would still be Uncle Thomas at every birthday party and school play. His certainty was both comforting and terrifying. Tisha had spent so long protecting herself from emotional risk that the possibility of genuine security felt almost foreign. Could love actually be this stable, this unthreatening to everything she had built? Maya, sensing the serious turn in adult conversation, began fussing with the particular tone that indicated she was ready for dinner and a bath. As Thomas rose to address her needs, he paused beside Tisha's chair and placed his free hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm not asking you to trust me with your heart immediately," he said softly, his thumb tracing a small circle against her shoulder that sent shivers down her spine. "I'm asking you to consider that what we've already built together might be strong enough to support whatever comes next. Maya deserves to see what healthy adult love looks like, and we deserve to explore what we could be together." The evening routine that followed felt different, charged with new awareness of possibilities that had been lurking beneath the surface of their friendship. Thomas bathed Maya with his usual gentle competence, but Tisha found herself noticing the way his sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong forearms, the careful way he supported Maya's tiny body, the soft voice he used to narrate each step of the process. "Uncle Thomas is going to wash your hair now," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle authority it always did during Maya's care. Maya babbled happily, completely content in his capable hands, her trust in him absolute and unquestioning. "She thinks of you as her father," Tisha said quietly, watching Maya splash contentedly in Thomas's capable hands. "Is that okay?" he asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice for the first time that evening. Instead of answering immediately, Tisha moved closer and kissed his forehead while he held their daughter, because Maya was their daughter in every way that mattered. The gesture was tender rather than passionate, a promise rather than a question. "It's more than okay," she whispered against his skin. "It's everything I never knew I wanted." Sometimes the best love stories weren't about falling, they were about building, one careful choice at a time, until what you had constructed was strong enough to weather any storm. Chapter 9. The Reckoning Begins. Sometimes the universe delivers justice not through dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet satisfaction of watching someone realize they destroyed their own kingdom while you were busy building yours. The August morning that would test every foundation they had built arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made Seattle feel like a different city entirely. Thomas had spent the night at Tisha's apartment, as had become increasingly common, though they still maintained the careful fiction that he was sleeping on the sofa, rather than acknowledging the emotional intimacy that made separate bedrooms feel artificial. Maya, now 7 months old and mobile enough to require constant supervision, had decided that 6 a.m. was the optimal time for practicing her newly acquired crawling skills. Her enthusiastic exploration of the living room, accompanied by a running commentary of babbles and squeaks, served as the most pleasant alarm clock either adult had ever experienced. The apartment had been completely baby-proofed over the past month, with safety gates blocking access to stairs, outlet covers protecting every electrical connection, and furniture corners cushioned against Maya's inevitable collisions. Thomas had overseen every modification with the thoroughness of someone preparing for a military operation. "She's going to be walking before her first birthday," Thomas observed, watching Maya navigate the obstacle course of furniture with single-minded determination. "Look at that focus. She's not just crawling, she's conducting reconnaissance missions." Tisha, still in her pajamas with her hair escaping from its ponytail, felt the familiar flutter of contentment that came from these ordinary moments. Over the past month, they had settled into domestic rhythms that felt both natural and revolutionary. Shared coffee while Maya entertained herself. Tag-team parenting that allowed both adults to maintain their professional responsibilities. Conversations that ranged from marketing strategy to parenting philosophy with equal ease. "I need to run home and change before the Morrison Group presentation," Thomas said, reluctantly preparing to break their peaceful morning routine. "Are you okay handling Maya's doctor appointment alone, or do you want me to reschedule the client meeting?" "I can manage one routine checkup without backup," Tisha replied, touched by his automatic assumption that Maya's needs took precedence over business obligations. "Dr. Chen just wants to check her weight and development. Should be quick." Thomas kissed Maya's forehead, and then, without conscious thought, brushed his lips across Tisha's cheek, a gesture so natural that neither acknowledged its significance until after it had happened. They stood frozen for a moment, both recognizing that casual intimacy had crossed another invisible boundary in their carefully negotiated relationship. "I'll see you at the office this afternoon," Thomas said finally, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Call if you need anything at all." After he left, Tisha found herself touching her cheek where his lips had been, marveling at how such a simple gesture could carry so much promise and possibility. Maya, apparently sensing her mother's distraction, crawled over and pulled herself up using Tisha's legs, her dark eyes bright with intelligence and mischief. "What am I going to do about your Uncle Thomas?" Tisha asked, lifting Maya into her arms for morning cuddles. "He's making it very hard to keep my heart safely locked. Away." Maya's response, a wet kiss on Tisha's nose, followed by delighted giggles, seemed to suggest that safely locked hearts might be overrated. Anyway, the pediatric appointment proceeded exactly as anticipated. Maya had gained appropriate weight, reached all developmental milestones ahead of schedule, and charmed Dr. Chen with her social skills and obvious secure attachment patterns. As they prepared to leave the medical building, Tisha felt the satisfaction that came from knowing her daughter was thriving, despite the unconventional circumstances of her birth and early life. The satisfaction lasted exactly as long as it took to reach the parking garage, where she found Michael Gambon leaning against her car with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the entire world existed for his convenience. 18 months had not been kind to the man who had once commanded rooms through sheer force of wealth and personality. His trademark platinum hair now showed dark roots and needed cutting. The custom suits had been replaced by designer jeans and a polo shirt that emphasized how much weight he had lost. Not in a healthy, athletic way, but with the hollow-eyed gauntness that suggested too much alcohol and too little food. The confidence that had once attracted her now seemed brittle, desperate around the edges. "Hello, Tisha," he said as she approached with Maya in her carrier. "You look good. Motherhood suits you." Every maternal instinct Tisha possessed went on high alert. Maya was strapped into her carrier, but Michael's presence felt like a threat to everything safe and stable in their world. She stopped walking while still several feet away, calculating distances to exits and mentally preparing for whatever confrontation he had planned. "What do you want, Michael?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I want to meet my daughter," he said, his eyes focusing on Maya for the first time. "She's beautiful. She has your eyes, but I think she might have my chin." The possessive pronoun hit Tisha like a physical blow. Maya was not his daughter in any meaningful sense. Biology might have provided genetic material, but Thomas was the man who had earned the title of father through daily devotion and unconditional love. "You lost the right to claim her when you humiliated me in front of 300 people, Tisha replied firmly. "Maya has a father. The man who was there for her birth, who changes her diapers, who reads her bedtime stories. You're just a sperm donor." Michael's facade of casual confidence cracked slightly, revealing the desperation beneath. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm ready to be a father now. I want to be part of her life, provide for her future. I have rights, Tisha, legal rights that courts will enforce." "What you have," Tisha said, moving closer to her car while keeping maximum distance from Michael, "is a child support obligation you've never acknowledged and parental rights you abandoned through your actions. But more importantly, what you don't have is any understanding of what it means to be a parent." Maya chose that moment to begin fussing, her infant instincts apparently recognizing that the adult conversation contained threats to her security. Michael stepped forward as if to approach the baby carrier, and Tisha immediately moved to block his access. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't you dare come near her. You had your chance to be part of our lives, and you chose cruelty instead. Maya doesn't know you, doesn't need you, and certainly doesn't deserve to have her world disrupted by your sudden attack of parental conscience." "This isn't over," Michael said, his mask slipping further to reveal the entitled anger that had always lurked beneath his polished surface. "I've rebuilt my business, recovered my reputation. I can provide her with opportunities you could never afford, alone." "I'm not alone," Tisha replied firmly, unlocking her car and preparing to secure Maya's carrier in the back seat. "Maya has a family, people who chose to love her from the moment she drew breath, people who proved their commitment through actions rather than words." As she drove away, leaving Michael standing alone in the parking garage with his threats and regrets, Maya's fussing gradually subsided into the peaceful contentment that came from being safely contained within her familiar environment. But Tisha's hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as she processed the encounter and its implications. Michael's appearance wasn't coincidental. He had researched Maya's doctor appointments, planned this confrontation, probably consulted lawyers about his legal options. The man who had once dismissed her as useless now saw something valuable enough to pursue. The greatest threats to happiness often came disguised as second chances, wrapped in apologies that couldn't erase the damage already done. Chapter 10. Queens bow to no one. She had entered this story as someone's discarded possession and was ending it as her own magnificent creation, ruling a kingdom built on love rather than fear. The autumn evening that would close one chapter of their lives and open another arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Seattle feel like poetry. Maya, now 9 months old and determined to walk despite everyone's suggestions that crawling remained a perfectly acceptable form of transportation, had finally mastered pulling herself upright using furniture for support. Thomas's apartment had been thoroughly baby-proofed to accommodate her increasing mobility and decreasing regard for gravity's limitations. 6 weeks had passed since Michael's parking garage ambush. 6 weeks during which Tisha had consulted lawyers, researched custody precedents, and prepared for legal battles that might threaten everything they had built. But Michael, despite his threats and bluster, had made no official moves. No court papers had arrived, no lawyers had contacted her, no formal claims had been filed. His silence felt more ominous than action would have. Thomas had responded to the potential threat by becoming even more intentionally present in their lives, if such a thing were possible. He had quietly consulted his own attorney about adoption procedures, researched the legal requirements for establishing parental rights through demonstrated commitment rather than biological connection, and begun documenting his role in Maya's daily life with the thoroughness of someone preparing for war. The law recognizes multiple pathways to legal parenthood, his lawyer had explained during a consultation that included Tisha's full participation. Biological connection is one factor, but consistent caretaking, financial support, and established parent-child relationships carry significant weight in custody determinations. That evening found them in Thomas's living room, Maya between them on a blanket covered with toys that produced various sounds when manipulated. She had recently discovered that banging blocks together created noise that delighted her and convinced nearby adults to pay attention. a cause and effect relationship she exploited with the strategic brilliance of someone destined for either politics or corporate leadership. "She's going to be a negotiator," Tisha observed, watching Maya deliberately drop her favorite rattle and then look expectantly at the adults who predictably retrieved it. "She's already mastered the art of making other people do her work while maintaining the illusion that she's helpless." "She gets that from her mother," Thomas replied, settling beside them on the floor with the casual ease that had characterized their domestic evolution. The woman who transformed public humiliation into professional triumph and single motherhood into successful partnership. Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's most recent achievement, clapping while babbling ma and ba in combinations that made both adults freeze with excitement. Language development was occurring ahead of schedule, another milestone in Maya's seemingly determined march toward independence and self-expression. "Did she just—" Thomas began. Ba, Maya announced with unmistakable pride, clapping her hands and looking directly at Thomas with the focused attention she reserved for her favorite people. The moment hung between them, heavy with implications that neither could ignore. Maya had made her choice about family structure with the unconscious certainty that only children possessed. Thomas was da-da not because of genetics or legal documents, but because he was the man who showed up, who played, who provided comfort and security and unconditional love. "She knows," Tisha said quietly, her voice thick with emotions too complex to untangle. "Somehow she understands that families are made by choice and love, not just biology." Thomas reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested beside Maya's blanket. "Tisha, I need to tell you something. What I feel for you. It's not obligation or convenience or even just attraction. I'm in love with you, with your strength, your intelligence, your incredible capacity to transform pain into purpose." The words she had been expecting and dreading finally hung in the air between them, impossible to ignore or deflect. Tisha looked at this man who had proven his character through countless small kindnesses, who had earned Maya's complete trust and adoration, who had somehow made love feel safe instead of dangerous. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Not of you, but of believing this could actually work. Maya needs stability, consistency. She needs adults who put her welfare ahead of their romantic complications." "Then let's not complicate it," Thomas said simply. "Let's just love each other the way we already love her, completely, unconditionally, with commitment that doesn't waver when things get difficult." Before Tisha could respond, the sound of someone pounding on the apartment door shattered their intimate moment. The aggressive knocking continued with increasing intensity, accompanied by a voice that made both adults stiffen with recognition. "Tisha! I know you're in there. We need to talk." Michael's voice carried through the door, slurred with alcohol and thick with the kind of desperate anger that made dangerous men even more unpredictable. Maya, sensitive to adult tension, began to whimper and reach for Thomas, who immediately scooped her into his protective embrace. "Call security," Thomas said quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious threat. "Don't engage with him directly." But Michael's pounding intensified, his voice rising to a level that risked disturbing the entire building. "I saw the pictures, Tisha. You and him playing house with my daughter. You can't keep me away from her forever." Thomas handed Maya to Tisha and moved toward the door, his body language protective but controlled. "Michael, you need to leave immediately. This is private property and you're clearly intoxicated. We can discuss any legitimate concerns through proper legal channels." "Legal channels?" Michael's laugh held no humor. "I tried doing this the right way, but you poisoned her against me. That's my daughter in there and I have rights." "What you have," Thomas replied through the closed door, "is a restraining order waiting to be filed if you don't leave immediately. Maya doesn't know you, doesn't need the trauma of your instability. and certainly doesn't deserve to have her peaceful home disrupted by your drunken demands." The pounding stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that felt more threatening than the noise had been. Thomas motioned for Tisha to move toward the bedroom with Maya, while he positioned himself between them and whatever Michael might attempt next. "I can give her everything." Michael's voice had dropped to a level barely audible through the door, but the desperation made it carry clearly. "Private schools, trust funds, connections that will open any door she wants to walk through. What can you offer that compares to real wealth and power?" Thomas opened the door just enough to speak face to face with the man whose genetics had contributed to Maya's existence, but whose character had forfeited any claim to her life. Michael stood swaying slightly in the hallway, his appearance even more deteriorated than it had been 6 weeks earlier. "I can offer her what you never understood," Thomas said with quiet conviction. "Love without conditions, security without manipulation, a father who shows up not because courts force him to, but because she is the light of his world." Through the partially open door, Michael could see into the apartment where Tisha sat on the sofa holding Maya, both of them watching the confrontation with the mixed fear and fascination that came from witnessing someone's complete emotional breakdown. Maya babbled softly to herself, completely unaware that the stranger at the door represented any kind of threat to her perfectly content existence. "She doesn't even know me," Michael said, his voice breaking with the realization of everything he had lost through his own choices. "She looks at you like you're her whole world." "Because he is," Tisha said firmly, moving to stand beside Thomas with Maya in her arms. "He was there when she took her first breath, when she smiled for the first time, when she learned to sit up and crawl and clap her hands. He earned her love through daily devotion, not genetic accident." Michael's gaze moved from Thomas to Tisha to Maya, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the family unit he had destroyed through his own arrogance and cruelty. These were not 3 separate people forced together by circumstance. They were a family bound by choice, by love, by commitment that had proven itself through every challenge. "I made a mistake," he whispered, tears finally flowing down his face. "That night at your party, I thought I was throwing away something worthless, but I destroyed the most valuable thing I ever had." "Yes, you did," Tisha agreed without softness or forgiveness. "But Maya and I survived your destruction, and we built something better from the ashes. She has a father who loves her, a family that chose her, a future built on security rather than chaos." As Michael turned and walked away down the hallway, his shoulders shaking with sobs that 18 months of consequences had finally forced from his throat, Maya chose that moment to demonstrate her newest linguistic achievement. "Dada," she said clearly, reaching toward Thomas with complete trust and infinite love. "Da-da-da-da." Thomas took her into his arms, his own eyes bright with tears as he kissed her forehead and whispered, "That's right, beautiful girl. Dada's here and Dada's never leaving." Some stories end with happily ever after, but the best ones end with, and their love continued to grow, because real fairy tales don't end. They evolve into something more beautiful with each passing day.